Hello and welcome back. This is Candace from Candoodle, and today we're going to be making this Flippin' Awesome baby card. So I'm going to be using the Lawn Fawn Flippin Awesome die as well as their Grassy Hillside Borders dies. The stamp set is the Hello Bluebird Party Parade as well as the baby from the Clearly Besotted Balloon Bunch stamp set. My favorite things, Welcome Baby, the Lawn Fawn Grassy stencil, and the My Favorite Things Cloud stencil. So I'm just starting by cutting a piece of cardstock in half and scoring at 4 1/4 on my mini scoreboard. So this is my card base, which I'll set aside for later. And then I'm just taking a piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock and putting it down with some repositionable adhesive to a piece of scrap paper for my ink blending. I'm going to use that cloud stencil along with a Tim Holtz blending stump and some Distress Oxide ink in tumbled glass to form a cloud background. This is one of my favorite stencils and I love doing this for a lot of different cards. And now before I'm going to blend the pieces that are going to make up the flipping pieces of this card, I just kind of mapped out where the die would go so I knew how much space I needed to cover with my clouds. So you can see me doing that there, and I just kind of tried to make them go seamlessly across the page as best I could. And then I'm doing that on another piece because there's going to be 4 of these flipping pieces. And so once I'm done doing that, I'm going to use the square and put those through my die cutting machine. And so when I'm done those, I actually went back in and put clouds on the back as well. I could have done this when it was still the full sheets of paper before I die cut, but I didn't think to do it before. And again, this isn't fully necessary. I just like to see the background continue once you pull out the flipping mechanism. If you didn't do this, you would just see white at the back. So I feel like it looks a little bit more finished, but that's just my own personal preference. So now I went and got another piece of cardstock and I'm just using my Cracked Pistachio and Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide inks to blend some grass. I'm going to cut these out with the Hillside Borders and then they're going to form the grounding pieces of my Flippin' Awesome little square pieces. So I'm planning to glue those to the front, but I wanted the back to still look finished. So what I did was I took that Lawn Fawn Grassy stencil and I used the same colors and I just ink blended on the back of these pieces. I didn't want to also glue die cut grass onto the back because I was worried it would add too much bulk because I already had those glued to the front, or well, I'm going to. You can still see them sitting on my desk at this point. And while I was doing that, I just blended another piece that I could use on my overall background, which you'll see me glue down later. So moving on to the stamping portion of this card. So I am just going to take all of my little party creatures who are holding all sorts of banners and things, and you can see that I am doing a little bit of masking because that alligator's little sign that he's holding is a bit too tall to fit on the Flippin' Awesome square pieces that are going to form my flipping mechanisms. But the little duck's yay banner is the perfect size. So I just masked that off so it wouldn't stamp with the alligator, and then I'm going back in and I moved my duck piece just to get his little banner. So it looks like the alligator is holding the same banner as the duck, and that way I know it's going to fit on my square piece later. So I just finished the rest of my stamping and I'm putting that onto my scan and cut piece because I'm going to cut these out with my Brother Scan and Cut, something that I like to do after they come off of that machine is I find the edges can be a little bit frayed, so I just use a bone folder to go over them and flatten them down. You saw me do that to one of them, but I actually do that to all of my stamps. And then we are going to move on to the coloring piece. So this, I'm just using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens. I wasn't a huge fan of these at the beginning, let me tell you, but I watched other people do it and they were using Bristol Smooth Cardstock by Strathmore, and I didn't have that paper, so I eventually acquired some, and oh my goodness, it makes the biggest difference ever. These I tried to use on watercolor paper to no avail. They did not look great and I was really losing hope, and I tried them on Bristol Smooth paper and I swear, try it because it's a whole world of difference. I am not a master at coloring whatsoever. I will leave that to the experts like the Kathy Raccoonsons and all of those people of the internet. But what I do is I try not to focus too much on shadows and light sources because I can get really caught up in that and get confused. Then it takes away from the whole therapeutic aspect of coloring. So I just kind of think, where does it make sense to have darkness, which is usually around the edges. And I use my darkest color there, and then I kind of use a slightly lighter shade to bring that down, and then I blend it out with the colorless blender, which again, the colorless blender, I didn't buy into the hype at first, and then I was watching some other videos. I saw like Carissa Wiley use it, and I was like, okay, maybe there's something to this. And seriously, this thing is amazing, especially when you use it on the Bristol Smooth paper. You can color a whole image with literally one color, which is what I did for my fox because I didn't have another like orangey color that I felt worked with it. So that's literally only one color with the colorless blender. And as you can see, I have some scratch paper on the left-hand side there. Just as that colorless blender is kind of picking up some of the color, I go over and scratch it off on my scrap paper before I come back to my coloring. That way I don't bring any of the orange into my gray and things like that. So again, I'm not a coloring master by any means, but these are really fun to play with, and they're super easy to use, especially if you're using them on Bristol paper. So if you have a coloring medium that isn't working for you, try using it on different papers because you might find it works better on some rather than others. And so I'm just going through and coloring here. I did put up all of the colors that I was using on the screen because I remembered to keep track of them this time. You can see me coloring two birds here, but I actually only ended up using one of them in the final card design that I ended up doing. And I didn't color my little hats and the drums and banners as I was going because I wasn't really sure on the color scheme I was going with that at first. So I wanted to see, like, once I had all my animals colored, what was going to look good. And I kind of just ended up going with like an oatmeal sort of brown color, very basic. And then I kept some of the drum and like the party hat and things like that blue because this is for my cousin who just had a little baby boy. So I went and cut the main piece from the Lawn Fawn Flippin Awesome die set, and I'm just going and scoring both ways along all of the folds. And Lawn Fawn has a really great video on this whole die set, so I would definitely suggest going and checking that out. And that's how the mechanism is going to work. So the thing is, I don't have a piece that is decorated to go on that back piece that is the final piece that's going to pull out. So I just went and put through the die cutting machine, the mechanism again, doing some partial die cutting. So now I have a piece that can fit perfectly on that little section. I'm just marking with a pencil where it goes because I don't want too much bulk behind there. So I cut off a little bit of the side. I'm going to go back in with my cloud stencil and decorate this so it matches the rest of my little pieces. And then I am going to have to blend some grass as well so it matches the rest of them also. I just kind of used one of the pieces of grass to kind of get a template of where that's going to go, and I tried to make it the same level as the rest of the grass, which then resulted in me accidentally gluing it to my scrap piece of paper. But I very gently peeled that off carefully and set it to dry, so once it was dry I could go back and cut off those edges. I'm just sticking down the rest of my grass pieces to each of the Flippin' Awesome little mechanism pieces, and you can see me using a small tool that's just an adhesive eraser, but it's kind of in the shape of a little pencil. And so now I'm going back in and I'm just cutting off those excess grass pieces and sticking down a blade that was trying to get away from me. So now I am going to go through and arrange all of my little stamped and colored critters into their spots that I would like them to go on. I was also kind of arranging who I thought would look good going first in the parade and second and all of that, just to kind of have a semblance of where I'm going here. And then I'm going to come in and glue each of my critters down to one of the Flippin' Awesome panels with some Lawn Fawn liquid adhesive, and I'm just putting them under my little piece of marble there while they're drying, just to make it sure it's stuck down really well. Especially I didn't want any edges coming up and getting caught or anything, which that is some foreshadowing for what is going to happen later, let me tell you. But you will see that in just a minute. So here I am coming in and stamping my sentiment. It looks like it's not fully centered, but it's because I forgot part of that was going to go into the mechanism. So when it pulls out from the mechanism, the sentiment will actually be centered. So now I'm going in and I am gluing down my Flippin' Awesome little panel pieces, and I'm just doing that with some double-sided tape between the score lines. As you can see, the first one gets glued down fully, so one of my backgrounds that I did the back of was unnecessary, which I forgot at the time, but it worked out because one of my little panels, I screwed up the clouds on the back, so it all worked out. And now I am just going and gluing down that Grassy panel that I had blended before, just so my overall card backing matches the mechanism that's on top. And so I am just going to use some double-sided tape. I would usually use a tape runner, but I am out and I can't just run to Michael's these days because of what's going on in the world. So I used some double-sided tape I had around, and I am sticking that mechanism down. I tried to get the grass to line up perfectly. It was stressful, but it got done. And so now what I thought would be last but not least is sticking down the little baby and the bird onto the final little piece here, and then I'm going to tuck it in and the card is going to be great. And here's where disaster strikes. So I'm noticing the baby's arm get a little bit stuck, so I'm like, oh, okay, let me just pull this up a bit and then it should be fine. I get it in, it's a little stuck. I'm like, oh, okay, this is probably fine. The baby's arm is missing. I just amputated the baby. Yep, so that happened. So I panicked a little and I was like, okay, where is the arm? So I got my tweezers and I took the baby's arm out of the card. And then I sat and thought for a second, and I had put so much work in at this point, I wasn't going to let this go to waste. So I shut my camera off to try and troubleshoot the situation. So what I ended up doing was I just kind of unglued that one part, flipped the mechanism so I could work on the area. And what I did was I stacked 3 pieces of 110-pound cardstock, so it would give me a little bit of a leveling piece to put in there. And so I'm going to show you, and this isn't the greatest, but I'm just trying to show you that it gives a little bit of a stair between the back of the mechanism and the piece that's directly above it. So what happens is it slides a little bit smoother, and even though the bird and the baby are going to have some dimension, that little piece, that stair, has more dimension. So I ended up having to peel off the baby, which inevitably took some of the grass with it. So I just went in and kind of used a Q-tip to add some Distress Oxide, so to get the grass back in a semblance of order. And then I stamped, colored, and cut a new baby, and he went down without a problem. He covered a lot of the issue area. I glued down that little stair that I had, and I put the mechanism back, and boom, it all worked. So if something goes wrong, stick with it. I learned that from Kelly Latavola. It is a great tool. I know sometimes it can feel like things are falling apart, but just roll with it, and I promise you will figure out a solution. It's handmade, not Hallmark, you know what I'm saying? Anywho, so I stamped and heat set the congratulations sentiment from a HoneyBee stamp set. I quickly Copic colored the pull tab and glued that down, and there you have it, the final card. I hope you enjoyed today's video, even with the mix-ups, which I decided to keep in because card making isn't always perfect. I really appreciate the time that you spend here with me. I hope you are all doing well during this time, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!